Relatives of murderers share the creepiest moments that stand out as red flags. I'm here. I hope everyone has their listening ears on today, as it's gonna get a little creepy. Let me know in the comments if you know anyone who has any of these red flags today, or any red flags that you know of. Story 1. Technically, my grandmother is a non-convicted murderer, and it was not remotely unexpected to any of us. She grew up in a farming family that provided known monetary support to the clan, and with over 1,000 acres, much of it woodland, they hosted multiple clan events and allowed them to hide out from the cops when the crackdowns began. She's in her late 80s, incredibly racist, cruel, hateful, and frequently exhibits psychopathic symptoms by mocking the suffering of anyone she deems inferior. A few years ago, she was driving to a church meeting around sunset and killed a 9-year-old man who was African American by hitting him with her car more than once. She claimed that he was lying in the road, but that was clearly a lie, though he was walking in the middle of it and that she thought he was a trash bag. Upon impact, she then backed up over him in her truck with front and back tires. Obviously, he did not survive this. Notably, she avoided all criminal charges. She even kept her license. Yes, she is still driving to this day. She did, however, lose a civil case and clearly sang the following as she left the courtroom. Killing an ench didn't used to be so expensive. I am so sorry that all of this is a true story. Growing up next to her was as terrible as you would expect, and I got out as soon as humanly possible. Some additional info. Wow, this seems to have resonated with a lot of people. On one hand, I am sorry to tell the story, but on the other, I felt people should know. To clear it up, this did happen in North Carolina. This is a small community population-wise. Almost all former tobacco farmers or current/former dairy farmers. One winery, a few vegetable farms. Yes, I know for a fact that the grandmother and her husband were in the clan. They held multi-double outdoor rallies behind the house I grew up in. There is a large hill and a tree line blocking the 5-acre field. One tractor rode in or out. There are also multiple lynchings held nearby. In the past, not during my lifetime that I am aware of. I loved growing up, absolutely surrounded by largely virgin oak and pine forests. But once I learned the history of this place, I could never shake it. More, thank you all for the amazing support, including a gold membership. A book, novella, or simply a historical blog is a question I will seriously consider for the future. For those wanting to know why I would avoid exposing my grandmother, love has nothing to do with it. I have no love for her. I do love my mother, and as I explained in one comment, there is a serious issue of housing when it comes to my mother. My pop left his entire estate to my grandmother, his mom, not my mom, so she is living in her marital home, only because she is allowed to. Given my mom's health and financial status, it would be overtly cruel to her if I did something that could cost her the house that should be hers anyway. Okay, genuinely, guys, I had to take a pause while reading this. Some people might call me a snowflake, and that's totally okay. I don't mind. But this story got me. I just can't stand racism. I think it is so stupid to dislike or hate someone based off of their skin color. And the fact this woman got away with literal murder is baffling, but honestly not surprising. The courts are so messed up that they let her keep her license. It's just so irritating. Like, I'm trying really hard not to swear right now because I'm actually shaking. I'm so mad. Okay, deep breaths. Shout out to OP for doing what is best for their family though, while also considering the history of the estate and what to do. I hope you find some closure and are able to figure out just what the hell to do, because I honestly wouldn't know either. Story 2. My paternal grandparents died in a murder-suicide. My grandfather shot my grandmother in their kitchen and then went outside and hung himself on a tree. And my father discovered them when he got home from school. This all happened before I was born. My father's side of the family wasn't involved in my life until I was an adult. My mom divorced him when I was little. I never met/talked to him. Didn't hear from my half-siblings and other people on that side until I was 18. I first heard about this from my mother when I was probably about 13. She told me that my father told her this, but that she didn't know whether or not it was true. My dad apparently was a compulsive liar. But when I got in touch with my half-sibling and my father's sibling later on, they confirmed it. This happened in the late 1950s. According to them, my grandfather was always a very moody person. He would go days at a time not speaking to anyone and doing nothing but drinking alone. He hated it when anyone tried to bother him or talk to him. My grandmother was very meek, a bit of a shut-in, and while she was more affectionate to the family than my grandfather, She also pretty much kept to herself and didn't do anything more than she had to for the kids. My father's siblings told me that there was domestic violence in the relationship, that the most emotion they ever saw my grandfather show was when he was screaming at or hitting my grandmother. That she would try to get him to eat dinner or ask him for money to go grocery shopping or something small, and he'd just snap, grab her and shake her, and start screaming about why she wouldn't just leave him alone. The day this happened, my father's sibling told me it was very strange. My grandfather joined them for breakfast before it was time for them to go to school, which was totally odd because he never ate meals with them. And they remember very specifically that he thanked my grandmother when she put his plate down, and then walked with him to the bus stop and watched them get on the bus, waving at them as it left. They've told me that's what they remember the most about that day, how nice and attentive he was because it was so out of the ordinary. They've all said that they think he already knew he was going to do that morning, and when they left for school. One of my father's sisters has told me that it wasn't even shocking that he would kill himself or their mother, and that the only thing surprising about it was that she never thought he'd shoot her. There was apparently some confusion about it because none of them even knew that he owned a gun, and that she always thought he'd end up strangling her to death or going too far while he was shaking her and bash her head into a wall or something. Sometimes reading some of the stories, it always just shocks me how different the times are. Like today, a kid could tell a teacher about this and someone would get involved to at least try and keep the kids safe. But in the 1950s, no one really gave two craps about this kind of stuff. It's just so sad to think that someone's last moments are in genuine fear of the person you love and thinking about what is going to happen to your kids. I wish the best for Opie's father's family and peace for the grandmother's soul. Story 3. My cousin killed one of his classmates some years ago. For some reason, I'm super terrified anyone will know who I'm talking about, even though this happened in a small town in North America. So here's the short version. He always struggled socially. He did have some mental problems, and for a year or so, taken away from normal school and put into a special program, which he hated. But about a full year prior to the murder, he changed a lot. He was in his late adolescent years, and his eyes were open to all the terrors out in the world, wars and such. It bothered him a lot. He would often talk about these kinds of things, about recent mass murders and such tragedies. He hated it, and he really wanted to do something. That's why he killed. He needed to know what it was like. He wanted to go and fight terrorists as soon as he finished school. He knew a classmate who walked through the woods on his way home. So he hit and waited for him and jumped out and stabbed him as he walked past. He said he panicked when the victim started screaming, so he stabbed him over and over and over again. Edit, the reason I was feeling uncomfortable sharing too much information was because I wasn't sure I was the best person to present this case. Even though I followed the court case and read all of the statements, and if this strictly was my information to post on the internet like this, not because I'm the killer in this story, but was never caught as few suggested. Anyway, please refrain from making assumptions based on what little info you have. He didn't just make up the terrorist thing as an excuse to kill. He really did want to fight terrorists. Following the arrest, the police announced that they had been monitoring him, as he had contacted the police requesting they ship him out to a country, can't remember which, where he could fight terrorists. He contacted the police rather than the military, as he knew for sure that there was no chance with his mental problems. Plus, he knew he would be required to go through training. He was also gay, and seeing the way gays were treated in different countries really angered him as well. He knew of several terrorist groups who specifically targeted gay people. This is a story where mental health can really convolute my opinion, because I firmly believe 99.9% of all murders are wrong. But I can understand how having mental difficulties can mess someone up. I think the fact that the police weren't putting more of an effort into monitoring the dude is a little worrying, because they kind of had all the signs. But I also get them not seeing this as a priority. I do wonder what happened to the dude though, and where he is now. Story 4. Not a relative, but I was an acquaintance of the victim and met their murderer several times throughout. This girl I went to high school with who always seemed nice and was super talented with the violin. This was in a performing arts school. We were never really friends, but I was close to a good friend of hers. Her mother was extremely psychotic and had just divorced her husband. She would frequently talk about the apocalypse and various ways to kill herself, which definitely freaked me out. The mother didn't seem to be super controlling or strict, but she was buying and hoarding pain medication. The one memory that really stands out to me is how she told my friend's mother that she was planning on killing herself and her children to spite her husband. When Christmas break was over, I heard about how she took a rifle and shot the girl, her brother, and herself. I was not surprised, but upset that none of us ever spoke up about the warning signs. Yeah, this really highlights the idea that if you see something, say something. Even if it feels silly or stupid or you feel like you're overreacting. You never know how serious someone's claims are. And if they're this bad, it's better to tell someone and hope it was actually nothing than not say anything and people get seriously hurt. Story 5. I have 2 experiences. Number 1, my freshman year, we were held on lockdown for 3 hours due to a boy bringing a gun to school. He had murdered his parents the night before and another student at 2 different locations and intended to take out all of his friends and ex-girlfriend before killing himself. He told the police that he was only going to kill his friends so they didn't have to hurt after he died. It was all over the ex-girlfriend. She told him she was pregnant to get money from him and told her boyfriend, the boy he killed, that it was his. She moved several states away after it happened. It's still an open case because apparently there may have been other people involved due to evidence that the boy was drugged out of his house. There were scratch marks on the doorframe and spent shelves through his yard leading into the woods where he was found. The school still tries to say it was a suicide despite the police saying otherwise. Number 2. The boy did not commit a murder, but I need to share because my school handled it so poorly. I was in a long-term relationship in high school. I broke up with a boy in my senior year and began talking to someone else. Being in ROTC meant I had many male friends who were rather close. One of them being a fellow who asked me to prom. I declined, saying that I was going with the other guy, and he kind of got huffy but seemed fine. The next day he showed me a picture of the pig he killed with a sledgehammer and said it was nothing personal and that he had to get it out of his system so he wouldn't make a mistake. School administration said I was overreacting and that he's a good boy. They wouldn't even let me switch class hours despite being terrified. I really hate this mentality of, oh, we don't want to ruin his life, he's so nice, after someone speaks up about a genuine fear they have. We had this one kid that everyone complained about because he would make threats, and we knew his stepdad had a crap ton of open ammo and guns in the home. But the school never did anything because they didn't want to deal with the repercussions, I guess. Ended up putting us all at risk instead of just giving this guy a warning. Story 6. Not related, but personally knew these guys who stabbed a 16-year-old kid to death. Long story short, a pair of guys, 18 and 19 years old, were doing/selling Xanax and Coke around the Soft Campus College apartment complex in Orlando. The particular group of friends was large, and we'd see these guys a couple times a week for the better part of that year. Oddly enough, at one party in another complex, someone tried to start that crap with me. One of the aspiring killers actually stood up for me, and the alpha male pacified the situation, while me and the 2 chicks I was with got out of there. So, New Year's Eve, 2004 to 05, these guys lure some random 16-year-old wannabe thug kid that crashed the party to their own apartment nearby and stabbed him to death. They take a roommate's car and dump his body in a retention pond nearby. The girl whose apartment, night party, they left. The 2 guys and another chick who was lying to cover for the guys were all investigated. 2 guys and their chick point towards the girl who threw the party. It takes about 5 to 6 weeks before a break in the case leads to the 2 guys and their chick getting arrested. I saw those guys a couple of times before the break and arrest came. Most of the group stopped hanging out due to the ominous homicide investigation taking place. I will never forget how those 2 guys were obsessed and constantly talked about how to disarm/take down of a person. People say there's a mentality of invincibility after you kill someone. Totally true in this case. These guys were fixated on being bad, but untouchable and without restraint. I wasn't surprised they were the ones. Story 7. I talked about this yesterday, but my uncle shot a man and had his children help drag the body to the mud so that the pigs could eat it. I wouldn't say they were huge red flags, but he would have my cousins and aunts steal from us whenever they would visit. That would probably be a sign that his wife and children were too afraid to say no to him. With that said, he was super nice to us and was pretty shocking to find out what he did. Edit to answer questions. Why did he do it? The man kept hitting on my aunt and telling her, "I'm gonna kill your husband, you'll be mine." Is he in jail? No, he's on the run. The man he killed was an illegal immigrant, which I think made it difficult for police to pursue the case. Or if so, People even reported them missing. I'm not sure if the pigs ate him or not. I would assume so since I don't think a body was ever found. He didn't work in a pig farm. It was a chicken farm in the remote parts of Georgia. He just happened to have pigs and a cow. My uncle is not Canadian. This was a little confusing at first, and now I honestly don't know what to feel. I'm not sure if I believe the husband or wife, especially knowing how OP said the wife wouldn't really disobey the husband at all. Maybe he actually did this and it could have been deemed self-defense, but I still don't think it was right to go to some extremes in desecration of the person by feeding them to the pigs. I honestly think they killed him for another reason, but I'm not sure what. Story 8. My cousin always had problems. His mother abandoned him for several years when he was young, and his father was old school, spare the rod, spoiled the child in a borderline abusive way. He got into drugs very early and showed signs of psychosis as early as his late teens. After he began using PCP, he again talked about scenarios like he was the reincarnation of our dead grandfather's soul, and he was going to come to collect our still living grandmother. When he began doing meth, he stole from his mother and stepfather. When I was 14, he gave me acid and told me it was just like weed. I was a sheltered kid. He was never violent, but super inappropriate with boundaries, like breaking into family members' houses without asking while they weren't home, and just chilling there, and other strange things like that. He rarely held down a job for more than a few months. He cleaned up, had a baby, and got some healthcare a year or two back. We thought he was doing better, but he relapsed on meth and shot into a car with 6 people in it. He killed 1 woman and injured 3. Story 9. I went to high school and played football with a guy who randomly killed a guy with a machete. He was honestly one of the nicest people I've met and really funny and genuine. He did have an odd home life. He lived with adopted parents but still had a relationship with his mom who lived nearby. All of a sudden, one day she takes him back into custody and doesn't go to school with us anymore. This dude was insanely good at football, like NFL good. He played at Texas A&M for 2 seasons before freaking out and running away from campus and dropping out of school. That was when things started getting weird. He then was in and out of jail for various charges relating to drugs, grand theft auto, domestic disturbance. I remember one day I read an article in which his mom was saying how he was trying to play football again. Then about a year later, the next article I read said he randomly murdered a guy with a machete on a jogging trail and called the police on himself. He was just recently found unable to stand trial and is undergoing psychiatric treatment. Again, this is another story about how someone's undiagnosed or diagnosed mental health issues can completely change them and can cause them to do things we never thought they were possible of doing. And I know it can be hard for the families of the victims and the offenders to try and make peace, of either blaming the person or the mental health issue. Story 10. My grandfather died and my grandmother remarried a pretty great guy, Ron. Ron had a brother, Robert. Ron and my grandmother lived in Louisiana and we'd frequently drive down there to visit them for Thanksgiving. My father, Ron, and Robert would go duck hunting and we'd dig up some crayfish. We played hide and seek with Robert for a while dinner was being cooked. I sat and talked with him about my life view as an 11-year-old. We ate dinner, drove back home, no issues. During the same time period, he picked up a drifter, killed her, and threw her body off a bridge. He eventually was caught and the family was devastated. They tried him for 2 murders, but he confessed as many as 48. Reading through his confessions in the case is terrifying. There were times he came to visit while we all lived in Colorado Springs and he killed people. He even sent letters to the police. The truth is, nobody could tell. There was no telling sign. As a kid, nothing seemed off about him. Even his own brother was shocked. Story 11. A high school acquaintance's dad came home one day and killed his wife, then shot himself on the front lawn. I heard the gunshots. I had met the dad maybe once or twice prior, and you could just tell he wasn't all there. He was twitchy. When he was contemplating something, his eyes would bug out of his head and dart all over the room, instead of just staring off into space, like the majority of people do. When you asked him a question, it would be like you were startling him. He acted a lot like a tweaker, but we knew he didn't do drugs. Thinking back on it now, the warning signs were all there. The mom/wife was always quiet, never made eye contact with anyone. The kids lied constantly about stupid stuff at school just to get someone to pay attention to them for a little bit. From what I've heard, they're doing better now. Story 12. A girl I was really good friends with in high school recently murdered her newborn. She was pregnant with her second child and never went to the doctor while pregnant. Gave birth in her house and then smothered girl immediately after she was born. Took the baby in a trash bag to the hospital and said she was stillborn. But after questioning, she admitted to the smothering. The worst part is that there weren't any red flags. In high school, she was always putting herself down, saying she had an ugly face and she was too skinny. Now no one would ever love her. But to a certain extent, that's just normal high school girl crap. Her mom always put a higher priority on finding a new husband than on taking care of her kids, though. So maybe she got it from her. Honestly, it could have just been another burden to her. Or she could have been suffering from postpartum depression, which can cause new mothers to act like this and potentially do harm to their child. I think if she had had a better support system, there's a strong chance this wouldn't have happened. Story 13. I'm pretty certain my mother killed my grandmother. The question I have is whether it was on purpose or an accident. Grandma had dementia and my narcissistic mother took her in for the glory and sympathy of a caregiver gets, and of course, access to her bank account. Within 12 hours of my grandma's death, my mother had her dogs put down. Within 24, had paid off her house, booked a 10-day cruise, and within 36, had bought a gigantic new SUV. I was the first person there. I saw everything. Did I prove any of it? Nope. Just know that my mother loved to beat the crap out of people, mostly me. If she would admit it was an accident, she might be functioning better than she is. Oh, in the hospital, she kept saying that her dog couldn't testify. Story 14. My dad's maternal grandmother shot her husband in the forehead with a .22 too long before I was born. Warning signs were having bruises and the occasional broken bone. Apparently, one day, she was just waiting with the gun for him to get home all crap-faced and beat him. Fun fact, the round didn't fully penetrate for whatever reason, so he ended up being in the hospital for a couple of days before he finally died. She ended up spending some time in the funny farm and ended up babysitting me when I was 3 or 4 years old. Upon asking my dad if that didn't seem a little weird to him, he replied, nah. She loved you to death. She wasn't gonna hurt you. And nobody else was going to either, with a weird little cackle afterwards. Story 15. I remember swimming pool races with my 2 young and sweet distant cousins years ago at a family reunion. We hung out all night, and even though my memory is horrible at best, I still remember what they looked like so vividly. 2 weeks later, they were murdered by their mother, a woman who was close with my mother. I didn't find out until years later when I found newspaper clippings in my parents' closet, but I somehow knew instantly who they were describing. There were no red flags. There was no hint that she was ever mentally ill. It seems to me that the absolutely worst murders are committed by the ones you never suspected. I know it's hard, OP, but at least you had some positive moments with them before they passed. I would tell you to think of those memories and not the newspaper clippings. Just remember them in their best and not their worst moment. I do agree with your comments that the worst tragedies are typically by those we don't expect, or even those we love. Story 16. Not a relative, but a guy at school. He was a couple of years older than me in our social circles and would cross now and again. Even as a 14-year-old before I worked in mental health, I knew there was something off with him. One summer holiday, someone blew up the science labs at school. No one was charged, but we knew it was him. Fast forward a few years later, and a new tenant in a house complained to the landlord about a stain in the ceiling and wall. On investigation, they found this guy's ex-girlfriend cut up in pieces wrapped in plastic bags in the attic. That butthole is now serving life. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.